my guys and gals in law enforcement, they're practicing all the time for the skills that they need on the job. And this is really no different. It's practicing the tools and the techniques that help keep you closer together as a couple.
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. I'm Brad Rhoads.
And I'm Marilyn Rhoads. We're here to help you build a marriage that's stronger, more connected, and full of grace.
I'm Rick Dayton, joining Brad and Marilyn as we bring you weekly conversations designed to inspire and equip you to live intentionally in your marriage.
We'll share practical tips, powerful stories, and strategies to help you and your spouse grow closer and thrive together.
So whether you're just starting out or have been married for years, there's always room to grow. Let's do this together. This is the Grace Marriage Podcast.
This is Brad Rhoads with the Grace Marriage Podcast, and it's a privilege being here today with a friend, a partner in ministry, somebody that's worn multiple hats in ministry. Welcome to the podcast, Kris.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be on, and anything you're doing is something that I enjoy being a part of, especially learning that from incorporating Grace Marriage into what we do at our police ministry. So good to be here.
That is awesome. Well, what we do in this podcast, we encourage couples to disciple marriages and specifically living it out themselves, but also equipping them on how to disciple marriages in all different areas. So thanks for being part of the podcast. Why don't you start out by just kind of introducing yourself to our audience? Tell us a little bit about ministry background, where you are now, what you're doing, where your heart is.
Sure. So, originally from Evansville, here in the Evansville area. I live in Newburgh, but originally from Evansville. And my wife and I, Missy, will celebrate 30 years of marriage next month. And we have two kids, Kyle and Sammy. One's in college at the University of Evansville, and my daughter will be there next year. And, started off, I spent early on in my career, I was a food, paper, and chemical sales rep. And worked for a great family there, now based out of Owensboro, CRS One Source, the Clark family. And from that point, back 2001, earlier in 2001, I surrendered my life to ministry, and that was the beginning of the journey. I think a lot of times people, when they surrender the life to ministry, they think they expect to be on a church staff somewhere. But man, I tell you what, God can take you if you'll let him, he'll take you in a lot of different directions. And the church is great. I spent 20 years in church ministry, and it was awesome. But what I learned over 20 years of church ministry is something that famous basketball coach said, Buzz Williams, now at Maryland, said, build as many relationships as you can, and then learn to connect the dots between those relationships. And now 20 years of church ministry, and now technically 13 years of law enforcement ministry. I can see where God was building relationships to use me in church ministry, law enforcement ministry, and now college basketball ministry. So been a wonderful ride.
Well, that is awesome. Well, I know you're pouring into marriage as in law enforcement. First of all, what church do you attend, Kris?
Christian Fellowship Church is our home church. We have another church that sponsors us here in the Newburgh area, Living Word Christian Church, great church. So we kind of have, CFC would be our home church, and then Living Word is a church that we're at quite a bit as well. Well,
CFC is a church that disciples marriages. Tell us before you get into law enforcement, tell us about CFC's marriage ministry and how CFC disciples marriages.
Well, they use Grace Marriage as well. And so our first experience, and really our first experience with Grace Marriage was years ago with you and your wife at a big public setting there in Owensboro. That was our first experience. But then we went through the first year of Grace Marriage at CFC a number of years ago. I forget how many years it's been now, 4 or 5 maybe, something like that. And so we watched how CFC utilized that ministry. And so they do that on a quarterly basis. And that's kind of how we've incorporated the quarterly checkups into our ministry.
So tell just some of our listeners are in Grace Marriage, know exactly what you're talking about. Some of them, when you've mentioned the quarterly, they're not sure what you're talking about. Why don't you kind of tell them what that looks like and why it's significant?
Well, you buy, well, I should say, and I'll give you, from our law enforcement standpoint, what we do is we have a big law enforcement marriage retreat through Thin Blue First. That's our ministry, our organization. And what we do is we kind of kick off a whole year at a marriage retreat. We did it this past weekend in Bloomington, Indiana. And then what we ask people is if they want to continue on and be a part of that, using the Grace Marriage material that we used at the marriage retreat, we'll follow up with 3 more quarterly checkups using the same material, same material from the same book. I should say the same book, but different material, and then different sessions in that book. So then, whether it's our ministry or through CFC or another church, what you do is you go through about 4 hours of just quarterly, just checkup, sitting with your spouse in a large group setting, but then breaking away, going through some material in a large group setting, and then breaking away during those quarterly checkups to have some serious conversations with your spouse about how things are going on in the home, asking some serious questions of each other about, hey, where are we at? Are we where we need to be spiritually from a husband-wife standpoint as well? And so you're asking very specific questions that get to a certain point to help you have a stronger marriage.
Yeah, and for you, so you and Missy, you're in it yourselves. Do you and your wife do it?
Yes. So we're actually, Jill and Brandon Pendergraft from Grace Marriage, they come and lead our marriage retreat for us. And then my wife, Missy, and I, we lead the quarterly checkups for our officers who sign up for those.
Yeah. How has it been personally impactful for you and Missy? And it's funny, you've been married 30 years. Our 30th anniversary was just 2 days ago.
Well, I tell you what, one of the things that it's done, by the way, congratulations on the 30 years. Ours will be next month, May 11th. So, but I think it's great. Here's one bit of advice for anybody who starts to lead these. The first year that we led it, for our officers, we came out of the marriage retreat for our officers, and then we were leading them for the 3 quarterly sessions we had left. And my wife got upset with me because I just kind of facilitated. I go into facilitator and event mode, and I was kind of leading the group, but I wasn't participating in the, my wife wanted to actually go through the lessons ourselves. So I had a wife that really checked me on that. So now we go through those, the last couple of years, we've gone through those together. And so they've really helped us to schedule our time wisely, as a couple, spend time together, prioritize each other, and emphasize spiritual things, not just for ourselves, but for our entire family. Prayer and how we're going to guide our kids, even though they're getting a little bit older.
Now, how did you get into so just for our listeners? So what Kris does is he's very active at his church, but he has a separate ministry called Thin Blue, and he's like chaplain to the Evansville Police Department. Correct?
Right. So I spent, in a nutshell, I spent 20 years in church ministry. The last 7 of those, I was a volunteer police chaplain with the Evansville Police Department, and I fell in love with that. And that really became, I think people began to look at me as the police chaplain, not necessarily a staff member at a church. And so that was the first sign that, hey, God was doing something in my life here. And so during COVID, of all times, when the economy was struggling and we were trying to figure out if churches were going to come back the way they used to, or they were before COVID, I decided to leave church staff and church ministry and start my own 501c3, Thin Blue First. And then, so this is our 6th year of doing full-time police ministry. And we, me and our volunteers, and I've got a female chaplain named Lindsay Schroer. She works with our female officers and civilian support staff. We work with the Evansville Police Department, the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office, Warwick County Sheriff's Office, and the Newburgh Police Department. So we've grown it in 6 years. We've grown it from 1 agency to 4 agencies, and about $100,000 budget to about $200,000 budget. So
that's awesome. Well, what specific challenges do officers face as it relates to their marriages?
Well, I'll quote the stat to you. The law enforcement divorce rate is 67, 68%. So it's really basically pushing 70%. And then if you dive deeper into that stat, you'll find that of the officers who are married at the beginning of their career, only 25% of them will be married to the same spouse at the end of their career. So there's a lot. I mean, divorce is a big thing, and it has to do with a number of issues. And I think one of the issues that Grace Marriage helps so much with is communications. So a lot of officers they'll be on the job, and because of their job, they struggle with being able to turn the switch off when they get home, and they're in control and they're demanding or whatever when they get home, and they need to be able to calm down a little bit better. So when they get home, if they don't turn that switch off from being in work mode, it can cause some problems in their homes and in their families. So that causes divorces. Being away from home, they work in a lot of off duty, debt, alcohol issues, things like that. Those are really stressors and stresses of the job that really cause just a huge problem with divorce in law enforcement.
Yeah, as a lawyer, I was practicing law for 22 years. When I'd come home and start asking Marilyn questions, she would say, Brett, I am not your witness. Because that'd just be like
Yeah.
picking things apart. And she's like, look, stop. And you have to be intentional to take off the whatever hat you wear during the day, because it's a whole different deal. So in law enforcement, they're in control, and
Yeah.
and most spouses aren't huge fans of being controlled. So I can see that causing some real problems.
Well, and I had one officer who finally started to figure out what was going on in his home, and he said he would intentionally go and take a different route home that was longer, that was along the Ohio River, and so that he could just decompress a little bit and try to do a better job of getting into the right frame of mind, right mode before he got home, and he'd be able during that longer drive to be able to turn the switch to the off
Yeah, my
section.
uncle said when he would leave the law office, he would visualize himself taking off his suit and then putting on his husband's suit. And then he said, as I was driving home, I'd ask myself, what does it look like to love Elizabeth well when I walk in the door? And he said,
Yeah.
so I'd get my mind ready. So I'd walk in and I'd be on, and I think to what you're saying, Kris, a lot of folks don't realize it. You almost need to prepare to be on at home. You got to be on at work, but it's not like our default setting is loving well. It takes intentionality, it takes thoughts. So I think that principle going from law enforcement home, it applies to pretty much most every profession.
I think another stressor that law enforcement struggles with that impacts their home life and their marriages is two things. Number one, the national research shows that 15 to 18% of law enforcement struggle with some form of PTSD. We did our own, with our 4 agencies that we minister to, we did our own internal study, and it came up to 15% said that they struggled with PTSD of our own officers here in Southwest Indiana. And so a lot of times when they come home, man, they close themselves off. I've known of guys that just go into another room. They don't want to be bothered by anybody, even in their own home, their spouse, their kids. They just shut the door and just zone out. And so when you do that, that's going to impact your marriages in a negative way as well.
Well, and if you see you drive up on significant trauma, you drive up on death, you see people go to jail, you see families implode, they see so much. I mean, it's got to be difficult from relationships outside of work.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of used to not be this way. Kind of the old school way of things is officers just bottle it up, deal with it internally, and keep doing your job. And I think, especially in the academies now, with the younger officers that are coming on board, there's a shift in taking care of the mental and the spiritual aspect of people's lives as well, because they see things on the job. I was just on scene just a couple of nights ago on something that was pretty rough, and after many of those situations, whether it's a car accident or maybe a fire, they'll have a debrief, and they ask specific questions in those debriefs to help the officers kind of support one another and be able to talk. Because one of the best things you can do is when you're struggling with stress like that is, and PTSD and trauma, is to talk. And so debriefs kind of help with that.
Now, do you ride with the officers at times, and you come up on the scenes with officers? So you actually involved in it sometimes?
Both, yeah. Sometimes it happens when I'm out with an officer. Um, More times than not, I'm sitting at home in my pajamas, getting ready to go to bed, and I'll get a phone call. Hey, we've got something going on out here. Can you meet us at such and such address? And you go and you help. You help deputies or officers, deputies who have seen something tragic or had to work on somebody that didn't make it, or you're relaying bad news to a family that has just lost a loved one and may not see their loved one anymore.
Now, you witnessing that yourself, how's that affected you and difficulties with Missy?
Missy's. I'll talk about it. Some things a little bit with Missy. I think the great thing there is a camaraderie in law enforcement, really in first responder work in general. That you, when you're on scene with with a group of people about something that's gone on, a situation that's gone on, you have a camaraderie with those guys and gals that you kind of chat and talk about things and check up on others who were there. So a lot of that, by the time I get home within a day or so, I've kind of processed a lot of that. Some people struggle with it longer based on their interaction with a certain situation, and we kind of keep an eye on those guys and gals and help them along. But Missy and we've been pretty fortunate and blessed that God's protected our home, God's protected our family, and I remember there was one situation. There's only been one situation where I had an officer friend of mine tell me he was about to end his life, and that was pretty traumatic to me because I ended up showing up at his house with some other people, and to try to get him some help. And I was talking more and more about that, and she told me, she goes, Kris, I think you need to go talk to your friend. And so in this line of work, you get to develop, and you really need to develop some trusted relationships with people, counselors, clinicians that will help your officers. And I have several of those, and one of them in particular, I said, Mark, I need to come talk to you. So I sat on his couch and shared what had gone on, and he just kind of walked me through it as a counselor would. So Missy's very good about telling me when I need to get help, but thankfully it hadn't happened that much.
Yeah, and it's so cool. I mean, just for our listeners, what Kris is doing. So Kris is like discipling officers and their spouses in their marriage. And you go to like the retreat and the sessions, and there's a room full of police officers just making the marriage a star of the show and focusing on their spouse. And I'm sure it's brought so much hope and so much refreshment to the marriages of those that you're serving. So thank you for what you're doing, Kris.
It's been a journey, and it's been a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, and out of all that hard work, God opens up a lot of other doors, and you just have to learn to prioritize your time and get where God wants you to be.
Yeah, and what I think the lesson to learn is, a lot of discipling marriage is just friendship. It's like when you care for somebody, whether it's an officer, whether it's people in your Grace Marriage group, whether it's people in your church, you show you really care about them, you care about their family, you care about their marriage, and you develop relationships over time. It is relationships that are impactful. And the fact that the officers know you, they trust you, they know you have their best interests at heart, I'm sure that plays a major role.
Yeah, developing that trust takes a while too. I mean, especially in law enforcement and any kind of first responder role. I have family. When I first started this 13 years ago, being even just a volunteer chaplain, I had family on a police department, at the Evansville Police Department, and it still took me 2 years just to get the door open. But once the door started cracking open, and I, was consistent in showing up and being there, and being a friend and developing relationships, you're right. I mean, relationships are key. And once you develop those relationships, for us, it's been ministry gold. It really has.
Yeah. So I think patience is really key. So like some Grace Marriage facilitators say, well, our group hasn't clicked. I don't feel that close. It happens over time. It happens over time and not usually instantly. And when you show you're not going anywhere, you're going to continue following up with your group. You're going to be continuing checking in on it. Next thing you look up and you're really close, so it's, so my encouragement in marriage discipleship would be focus on relationship and be consistent.
Yep, you really do. I feel like in that case we've been consistent in offering the large group marriage retreats. For for couples who want kind of the one shot in the arm once a year help, and then been consistent offering for several other couples that want to do the quarterly checkups throughout the year. We've been consistent offering those, and hosting and providing food and being a listening ear, and
How
it's
has
worked out
it
well.
been for the officers? I know a lot of the Grace Marriage experience is just one-on-one structured communication between husband and wife. Has that been awkward? Has it been something that they've embraced? I mean, how has that gone? Because we find the gold in the Grace Marriage sessions are typically when husbands and wives are just talking. I mean, have you feel like they've had breakthroughs there?
Yes, and before I answer that question, I will say, because I think it'd be helpful to other people to hear, if you'll remember, Brad, I was struggling whether or not this would work with law enforcement, and
Hmm.
you looked at me, and I'll never forget it. You looked at me and said, "Kris, your officers do things that are much more difficult than this. They can handle this." And so that was a selling point. I'm like, how can I fight that? That's the best line I've ever heard. So when the first year we used this at a marriage retreat, we had Brandon and Jill come in, and I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And there were tears from couples who were talking to each other about subjects that needed to be brought out in their own between the two of them, and they talked through those things. And so yes, I mean it's been, I think the people, I think what speaks volumes is they keep coming back.
Mhm.
If it wasn't working, they wouldn't come to the retreats, and a dozen couples or so wouldn't be signing up for the small groups that we offer every quarter. And so it's worked very well.
That's awesome. Yeah, my wife and we've been doing it for 15 years. Well, yeah, this will be our 15th year. And, life keeps happening, and everybody's a lot of stress in life. Officers uniquely because they have a lot of stuff every day that's traumatic. But in order to really grow your marriage, you've got to stop, get out of your marriage and work on your marriage, and just think big picture. How's our communication? How is our sex life? How is our conflict resolution? Are we giving each other grace? Because otherwise you'll just get in the spin cycle of life. And when you're in the spin cycle of life and all you're doing is just trying to get through each day and wake up and do it again, marriage goes flat pretty quick.
It really does. And I think that's one of the things about Grace Marriage is if I could just say one thing that's been very helpful in our own home, but also in that I've seen played out in the lives of our officers who go through this, is just as tough as it can be sometimes, is the questions that are asked in the material, I think has become natural for a lot of us just to have, whether it's easy or difficult conversation, to be able to have those conversations now with our spouse and talk through things. I think it's been really helpful.
Yeah, when you're discipling marriage, you're helping people develop new skills. So the first session might have been more awkward for them, and then it's not as awkward, and they become more comfortable in communicating, more comfortable in talking, more comfortable in listening. It's like anything. When you first start doing something, it's not very easy. But the longer you do it, the better you get at it. So our prayer and hope is as you disciple marriages that physical closeness, emotional closeness, and spiritual connection, spiritual intimacy, it becomes more natural just because you have better. You don't get good at anything without practice. And in Grace Marriage, yes, it's a time of planning, addressing issues, celebrating wins, but it's also practice. It's also practice to help you get better at these things between sessions.
Well, and think about what you just said, practice. My guys and gals in law enforcement, they're practicing all the time. They're practicing, they're rehearsing, they're practicing, they're going to training for the skills that they need on the job. And this is really no different for any couple that goes through it. It's practicing the tools and the techniques that help keep you closer together as a couple.
Yeah, we know that in everything you've got to practice to be good. You do sports ministry, like it's the University of Evansville basketball team. They don't just give them their schedule and all show up at the first game.
Yeah.
Tons of practices, tons of stuff, tons of getting ready. Lawyer. When I was a lawyer, I do continuing legal education. When your doctors have to do continuing medical education, accountants have to do this. Everybody knows that you have to continue to stay on top of something to be good at it and for it to go well. And one of the things in discipling marriages we're talking about is that is also the case in marriage. Marriage, loving one another and being married well, and then merging two lives of people that struggle into one mysterious, beautiful, existence as a couple. That's not easy, and it takes practice. It's beautiful. It's fun. It's great, but it just doesn't happen organically on autopilot.
Well, and I would say too, and I don't know if you would agree with this, it seems to be when you've got younger kids, really, like we'll be married 30 years, Missy and I, next month. And it's just now for the two of us getting a little bit easier,
Yeah.
because when your kids are younger, man, you're going through a lot of struggles, and you need a lot of these skills to be able to walk through decisions that need to be making to stay closer with each other as a couple and to talk through different things that are going on with your kids. And so as our kids have gotten older, and now starting to spread their wings and step out a little bit more on their own, it's getting a little bit easier, but it stays tough for a long time.
Yeah. When I launched Grace Marriage, we had 5 kids aged 5 to 16. We had like 5 kids on 4 different sports teams. So we had but I remember my board and I was trying to start Grace Marriage, at the same time. And my board I remember my board telling me, "We're glad your life is so difficult and complicated." And I'm like, "Well, thank you." I said, "Why?" They said, "Because you date Marilyn every week and people can't tell you don't understand, because marriage has to take priority in every season. It can't be put on hold. It can't be like, well, this isn't the season that we can really enjoy marriage."
Yeah.
It's marriage is something biblically that has to come ahead of every other horizontal relationship, or as Tim Keller said, if anything comes ahead of it other than Jesus, it'll slowly die.
That is true. And that is another positive from the Grace Marriage material is just the emphasis on Scripture and the emphasis on making Christ the center of your marriage. And if He is the center of your marriage, He can be the anchor that keeps you held down in times of turbulence.
Yeah, well, in times of turbulence, Jesus said in the book of John, in this world you will have troubles. You will have much trouble, and the reality is it's true. But if you focus on marriage, you can go through those troubles together, and they'll actually draw you closer together. Well, Kris, thanks for being in the podcast. If you don't mind, Kris does an amazing thing in serving our law enforcement spiritually and their marriages. Could you tell our listeners, about your ministry, where they can find you, if they want to support you or help you in any way, how they go about that?
So the name of the organization is Thin Blue First, and you can learn more about us at Thin Blue First. That's Thin Blue and then the number 1 st.org, thinbluefirst.org. I always tell people that there's an evangelistic section of what we do, portion of what we do, and everything that we do, and there's a discipleship element. And so we try to encourage and equip through evangelism and discipleship to officers and their loved ones.
Well, Kris, it's an honor being your friend. I'm proud of you in your ministry. Honored to be fighting for marriages alongside you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Been great. Thanks for your friendship. Appreciate it.
Hey, God bless you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Grace Marriage Podcast. We really hope you're feeling inspired to take intentional steps to grow in your marriage.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us spread the message of grace and reach even more couples.
And if you have a moment, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps others discover the podcast.
To learn more about how you can grow in your marriage, visit us at gracemarriage.com. Keep building stronger, grace-filled marriages.
We'll see you next week on the Grace Marriage Podcast. Until then, keep growing in grace.